You're lucky to have been assigned night duty at Santa Graveyard. This cemetery is quite deserted, where a number of mysterious events have taken place. But don't worry, you only need to follow a few rules. Rule number 1. As soon as your shift begins, turn on the graveyard lights. If any light turns off on its own, do not go near it. Someone is there who doesn't like the light. Rule number 2. If you hear footsteps inside the graveyard, go straight into the cabin and never peek out of the window. If it sees you, it will come inside the cabin. Rule number 3. If at 3 a.m. you see a woman standing near a grave, don't go close. This woman is often seen standing at her own grave. Rule number 4. Some graves have no names on them. If suddenly those graves disappear, immediately pick up the nearby phone, call, and just say, "Help," then stay silent. If someone arrives to help, you can come out. If not, don't step outside for 2 hours. No CV is needed for this job, only courage. Tag the friend who would dare take this job. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The first night started colder than I expected. I arrived just before 11, my breath turning into faint white clouds in the air. The cemetery stretched out on both sides of the gravel path, iron gates groaning as I pushed them shut behind me. The old caretaker had already left. He didn't wait around to see if I'd follow the rules. He just gave me that folded piece of paper, nodded once, and drove off without headlights. The cabin sat in the middle of the graveyard, an old wooden structure with a single light over the door. Inside, the smell of dust and damp paper filled my lungs. A small desk stood against the wall, a logbook with yellowed pages lying open. I noticed the last entry was weeks ago. My flashlight beam caught something scratched into the desk. Don't look. Rule number 1 was simple enough. Keep the graveyard lights on. I checked the switchboard. Rows of red and green buttons glowed faintly. I flipped the master switch and one by one, tall lamps across the graveyard blinked to life, spilling pale cones of light over the crooked rows of headstones. The graveyard didn't look as scary in the glow, almost peaceful. Still, the rules echoed in my head. By midnight, the silence pressed against my ears. No cars in the distance, no owls, just the low hum of the lights outside. I sat at the desk, tapping my fingers, pretending to be calm. Then I heard it, the faintest flicker, a buzzing sound. I looked up and saw one of the lamps near the northern gate sputter and go out. My instinct was to grab the flashlight and go check, but the words from the rule sheet stopped me. If any light turns off on its own, do not go near it. Someone is there who doesn't like the light. I forced myself to stay put. I stared at the dead lamp from the cabin window. The patch of darkness beneath it seemed heavier than the rest, like the shadows clung to it. I couldn't see anyone there, but I had the unsettling feeling that if I stared long enough, something might stare back. I closed the blinds. The night dragged on. The clock ticked louder than normal, every second crawling. I flipped through the logbook, hoping to distract myself. Most entries were ordinary. 11 p.m. lights on, 3 a.m. all clear. But then one line stood out, written in messy ink. Heard footsteps, followed the rules. There was no follow-up, no signature. It must have been around 12:15 when I heard it myself. Crunch, crunch, slow, deliberate steps on the gravel outside. They weren't hurried, not like a stray animal. They were steady, measured. My pulse jumped into my throat. I remembered rule number 2. If you hear footsteps inside the graveyard, go straight into the cabin and never peek out of the window. If it sees you, it will come inside the cabin. I was already inside, but my instincts screamed to look. I sat frozen in the chair, nails digging into the wood. The steps grew closer, circling the cabin. Crunch, crunch, then silence. I held my breath. Something brushed against the cabin wall, a faint drag like fingers across old wood. I pressed my back to the chair, staring at the desk, refusing to move. Minutes passed. At least I think they were minutes. Time felt broken. Eventually, the sound stopped. The air felt lighter, as if whatever it was had drifted away. I almost convinced myself it was just the wind. But then I made the mistake of glancing at the rule sheet again. My eyes caught rule number 3. If at 3 a.m. you see a woman standing near a grave, don't go close. This woman is often seen standing at her own grave. That line alone unsettled me. But what truly froze me was the faint sound that followed. A voice, humming. It came so softly through the cracks of the cabin window. A low tune, almost like a lullaby. My eyes shot to the clock. It was 12:45, far too early for the warning to apply. I told myself it couldn't be real, maybe a trick of my imagination. But the humming continued, steady and unbroken, as though someone were standing right outside the cabin window, waiting for me to disobey. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound crawled beneath my skin. When I finally dared to look up again, I noticed something strange. In the logbook, near the messy entry about footsteps, another line appeared, written faintly in pencil. Don't hum with her. I hadn't seen that before. The next half hour dragged on in torturous silence. Every creak of the cabin floor, every gust of wind through the graveyard felt magnified. My throat was dry, and I could barely swallow. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal on my phone, and the old rotary phone in the corner was silent. Then, at exactly 1:30 a.m., another graveyard light flickered. This time it was closer, right near the row of nameless graves. The bulb gave a final buzz and died, plunging that section into blackness. I froze, staring at it, waiting. The humming didn't return, but the footsteps did. This time, they didn't circle the cabin. They stopped, just outside the window. I didn't move, not even to blink. And then tap. A single knock on the glass. My breath hitched. The rules never said anything about knocking. The knock at the glass was soft, almost polite, but it drained every bit of warmth from my body. I stayed perfectly still in the chair, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly the wood dug into my palms. I remembered the rules. Never peek out of the window. I didn't. Not then. Not even when a second knock followed, slower, like whoever or whatever stood there was patient, waiting for me to break first. Minutes bled together. My eyes stung from refusing to blink, my chest aching from shallow breaths. Finally, after what felt like forever, the sound faded.
No footsteps retreating.
No crunch of gravel. Just absence, and somehow that felt worse. I glanced at the clock. 2:20 a.m. The silence pressed in heavier than before. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe it was a branch swaying against the glass? Maybe some kid sneaking in to mess with me? That would have been easier to believe. But the rule sheet was still on the desk, its words cutting deeper into my nerves. Someone had written them for a reason. At 2:35, the phone in the corner rang. The sharp, metallic bell shattered the quiet. I jumped to my feet, nearly knocking the chair over. The sound filled the cabin, insistent and shrill. I turned to stare at the phone, the black rotary device sitting in its cradle like a relic. The rules hadn't mentioned calls. Should I answer? I froze, torn. But the bell kept screaming, and every instinct told me letting it ring was worse. With shaking hands, I lifted the receiver. First, only silence. Then, faintly, a sound breathing. Not mine, not distorted by static, but calm, steady, deliberate. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, whispering, "Hello." The breathing continued, unbroken. No voice answered. Then, slowly, so faint I almost missed it, a whisper came through. "You looked." I slammed the phone down. My pulse pounded in my ears, my chest tightening like I couldn't get enough air. I hadn't looked. I swore I hadn't. But what if in some way they knew my thoughts, knew my temptation to peek? I didn't pick the phone back up. By 2:50, my nerves were so frayed I wanted to run. But then I remembered rule number 3, the one about the woman at 3 a.m. I clung to the hope that if I just stayed put, just lasted another hour, dawn would come and I'd be free. At 2:55, I made the mistake of glancing outside. Not directly, just a sliver, a gap in the blinds. But it was enough. A woman stood near the row of graves, her body pale under the thin moonlight. She wore a long dress that brushed against the ground, her hair hanging loose around her face. She didn't move, didn't sway in the wind, just stood perfectly still. The rule said 3 a.m., yet here she was 5 minutes early. My mouth went dry. I dropped the blinds, backing away from the window as though she could see through the narrow crack. The humming returned, soft at first, then louder, like a lullaby seeping through the cabin walls. I shut my eyes, but that only made it worse. The melody crawled into my head, pulling at me. It was sweet and familiar, almost comforting, and that frightened me most of all. When the clock struck 3 o'clock exactly, the humming cut off. I opened my eyes and found silence pressing in again. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but full, like the world is holding its breath. I didn't dare check the window. Then the ground outside shifted. I heard it as much as I felt it, like the earth itself exhaling. I crept to the edge of the blinds and, despite every warning in my brain, peeked. Several graves, the ones with no names, were sinking. The headstones crumbled into the dirt, the ground collapsing inward. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving behind uneven patches of soil. Rule number 4 blazed in my memory. If suddenly those graves disappear, immediately pick up the nearby phone, call, and just say, "Help." My legs carried me before I even realized it. I grabbed the receiver, dialed nothing, just lifted it, and whispered, "Help." The line clicked, then silence. I held the phone tight, waiting, listening. No voice came, no confirmation, no promise that anyone was on the way. Just the same steady silence, heavy as the graveyard air. I placed the receiver back down, my hand trembling. Then I waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The clock ticked louder, every second stretching. Nobody came. The footsteps returned, circling the cabin again. This time closer, bolder. Gravel crunched under heavy weight, slower than before, as though savoring the sound. My chest locked up. I pressed myself into the far corner of the cabin, the blinds drawn tight. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The knob rattled. Once, twice, then still. I pressed my hand over my mouth, forcing myself not to make a sound. The knob rattled again, harder this time, shaking dust loose from the frame. Then silence. I counted each second. 1, 2, 3, 60. The clock struck 3:25. Still no help. Still no voices. And then, faintly, the phone began to ring again. The shrill ring of the phone cut through the silence, stabbing at my ears. I stared at it, my body refusing to move. The last time I picked it up, I heard breathing. The second time, a whisper accused me of something I hadn't done. Now, with the graves gone and the footsteps outside, the sound of that bell felt like a trap. But the ringing wouldn't stop. It went on, steady, mechanical, each chime slicing through my nerves. Finally, shaking, I lifted the receiver. "Hello!" My voice cracked. This time, the line wasn't empty. I heard myself, my own breathing, my own faint movements, as though the phone were replaying me in real time. I pressed the receiver tighter, heart hammering. The sound mirrored everything I did. A faint inhale when I inhaled, a shift when I shifted. Then, in between those mirrored breaths, something else slipped through. A whisper, closer than before, lower. "Behind you." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I spun, my back pressed to the wall. Nothing, just the cabin, shadows stretching long from the single desk lamp. My own reflection quivered faintly in the cabin's glass door. I told myself not to panic, not to move, but the knob rattled again, harder this time, metal grinding against the wood. I backed toward the far corner, eyes locked on the door. The rattling stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over, until the outside lights flickered, one by one. Buzz, pop, darkness swallowed the graveyard. Only the single bulb in the cabin remained, buzzing faintly overhead. The silence outside deepened.
No footsteps. No humming.
Just a void pressing against the walls. I thought about the rules again, about the old caretaker who left me with them. They weren't just warnings, they were survival instructions. and I was running out of rules to follow. At 3:45, the phone rang again. This time, I didn't want to answer, but I also couldn't stand the sound. Slowly, I lifted the receiver, my hands slick with sweat. A voice answered before I spoke. "We're here." My chest loosened with relief. Help. Someone had answered my call after all. I opened my mouth to respond, but the line crackled, and the voice shifted. The tone changed, softer, almost a laugh. "But we're already inside." The line went dead. I froze. My gaze swept the cabin. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching deeper than they should. The air thickened, heavy, like someone else was breathing beside me. Then I saw it. The cabin door, the one I had locked, shifted open by an inch, just enough for cold air to seep through. I didn't move, couldn't. A shadow slipped inside, sliding across the floor without sound. I pressed myself tighter into the corner, every nerve in my body screaming. The shape lingered near the desk, faint but undeniable, its outline blurring against the lamplight. I tried not to breathe. The figure stood motionless for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, it turned toward me. Though it had no face, I knew it was looking. The lamp above buzzed louder, flickering. Each flash of light showed the shadow closer. One moment by the desk, the next halfway across the floor. Another flicker, and it was standing only feet from me. My throat closed. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. The phone rang again. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, towering over me, as the bell echoed. Against every instinct, I grabbed the receiver. My hand shook so hard the cord wrapped around my wrist. I lifted it to my ear, and this time the voice wasn't mine. "Time's up." The lamp shattered. Darkness filled the cabin. I couldn't see it anymore, but I felt it. Its presence pressing down on me, cold and heavy. The cabin door slammed shut from the inside, trapping me in. The last sound I heard before everything went silent was the soft drag of footsteps across the wooden floor, coming closer. And then nothing. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe for more.